Hello and welcome. Sorry about that. I'm still just trying to keep up on all the news that's coming out of Ottawa right now. This is True North. I'm Andrew Lawton, and we are covering live the results of the Conservative Party of Canada's caucus vote on Erin O'Toole's leadership. If you haven't heard yet, Erin O'Toole has been ousted as leader by a vote of his own caucus. Now, I'm getting some conflicting numbers here. There are 119 Conservative members of Parliament. That part's clear. It sounds like 73 of those voted against him. 73. Now, the reason there's still a little bit of doubt is because it's not exactly clear how many might not have voted. This seems like a big deal. You wouldn't want to miss this, but evidently some people did. We're going to be talking about this, also monitoring some of the developments about who's throwing their hat in the ring for interim leader. But more importantly, what does this mean for the Conservative movement in the country? What does this mean for Canada's Conservative Party and all of that? And what does it mean for Erin O'Toole? Want to welcome into the show here Candice Malcolm, my friend, colleague, and boss, the founder and editor-in-chief of True North, and also Harley Sims. I just realized, Harley, I don't know your title, but you are pretty much the smartest person at True North. So I thank both of you for joining. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for introducing us, and thank you everyone for joining us. I think it's a really exciting. I have to say I was kind of nervous. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I felt a lot of anticipation about this vote. I'm not surprised that the Conservatives decided to remove O'Toole. There's so many issues with him, and this was a long time coming. But I will still say I think it's a bit of a sad moment in Canadian politics. I think it's upsetting. So many people really did believe in Erin O'Toole. They thought that he had the potential to be a great leader and a great prime minister. And I mean, for him personally, it's like he was trying and doing everything he could to basically beg and plea for his job. I mean, it was kind of sad and kind of pathetic to see his response over the past 48 hours or so. And, he's got a family. He lives in Stornoway. He's got to move. He's not just losing his job. He's getting evicted from his house. It's unfortunate to see. It's sad to see the infighting in the Conservative Party, but I'm going to remain optimistic that this is a move for the better and that the party will become stronger. Hopefully they can find a leader that they can all unite around and they can carve out a path for the Canadian people, for their party that is unique and distinct and appealing to Canadians.
You said you weren't surprised, which takes the wind out of the question I was about to ask. If we had started this show before the results were in, I would have asked everyone to make predictions. This is actually a better way because no one can be wrong. They can just claim that the result was what they would have predicted. But I'll ask it in a different way. Harley, are you surprised by this result, or is this where you thought it was headed?
That's a good question, Andrew. I think, like a lot of Canadians, I've gotten a little bit cynical about parliamentary politics over the last 2 years. You start wondering what they're thinking, whether they're seeing the way Canadians are, suffering under these lockdowns. And we haven't heard O'Toole really reflect any of the concerns that the convoy has brought forward. I'm thrilled to see such immediate movement, and let's not pretend that the convoy didn't have anything to do with this. When you're on Parliament Hill, it's easy to sit within those walls and kind of focus on what you're talking about and think that that reflects what's outside the walls. But when you've got a bunch of trucks and people right outside on the street, that is bringing the concerns of Canadians right to their doorstep, and so the effect that has had has been immediate. I think this is the right way to go. I agree with Candice that this isn't entirely positive. I think for this to happen, I mean, it's shaken the Conservative Party. But let's face it, in the last 48 hours, what Erin O'Toole has brought forward as concessions, maybe a sooner leadership review than he'd wanted, reaching out to the 905 region. These are opportunities he had already, and they didn't work. And so now it's time that we try something new, and we'll have to see what happens with the interim leadership.
I just want to jump in on that, Andrew, because I think that one of the interesting things that we've seen, and sorry to interrupt you, Andrew, I just wanted to respond because I agree with something Harley said here, which is that when after the election, we saw like a pretty confident and almost arrogant Erin O'Toole. He was really defensive. He was insistent that the path that he was going on was the right path. He continued a lot of the rhetoric that really upset the base. Talking about how Conservatives have to have the courage to change. It was like the things that he was most excited about were his own progressive personal values. And that just isn't really what a lot of conservatives want to hear from their leader, especially after losing a disappointing and winnable election. We didn't see a lot of reconciliation. We saw a leader that was really willing to uh, punish people who were criticizing him, saw some vindictiveness in the way that he treated people like Denise Batters and Shannon Stubbs. Look, you're going to have a lot of disagreement within a conservative party. That's just the nature of conservatism. We don't all agree on every single point. We don't have one monolithic brain. We're not the liberal parties. We have a lot of different people, different folks, different backgrounds, different ideas. And part of the challenge of a conservative leader is holding that coalition together. And I thought it was sort of sad to see the way that Erin O'Toole was acting over the past 48 hours, because initially we saw him put out a statement basically saying, you're either with me or against me. You're either with, if you're against me, you're with Randy Hillier, and sort of trying to paint his own party as being like, half the people in my party are crazy fringe people, and the other half are like me, and we're the pristine, moderate progressives, and we want to lead the country. That was a really bad position to take. And then over the last 24 hours, the news stories that we've seen have been focused on, I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll be better. I'll be true blue again. I'll be truer bluer, as we were joking on the True North Slack channel. And it's like, maybe if he had shown more reconciliation after the election, more humility, more willingness to engage with the other side, and instead of just malign them, like we saw sort of full circle in the last 48 hours, he went from saying, if you're with me, if you're against me, you're a crazy person, to, okay, I'm willing to listen to the other side. And I think you're right, Harley, that if he had taken more of that approach in October after the election, he might still have a job today.
Yeah, and I think that one of the dimensions of this that I want to bring about to something you both had said. I mean, this isn't a happy thing. I've met Erin O'Toole. I've interviewed him. I've met his family. I don't like seeing anyone go down like this. Ideally, he could have dealt with the concerns right after the election, or simply resigned gracefully when he realized that he just didn't have the grip on his caucus that he thought he did. And I do want to go back and talk about the timeline here, because it's very important. So he went into the 2021 election thinking it was not necessarily his to lose, but thinking like he stood a good shot, which I think in some ways he may have. And then by the end of it, he's lost ground that Andrew Scheer had made up, but he spoke about the election as though he had won. There was never really any acknowledgement that he had lost. He refused to talk about the PPC surge, much of which came off the backs of conservative candidates. And ever since the election, anytime he's been asked about what happened, he said, well, we've got a review. We're doing an independent review. We're doing all of these things. And then the review comes out last week. And I think the timing of the review plus the convoy really worked against Erin O'Toole here. The review comes out, and from everything we've read about it, doesn't really get into the big issues that conservative Canadians and people in the Conservative Party have with O'Toole. So you had flip-flops throughout the election. You had a lot of caucus members that had no idea where they stood because of policies he had put forward. And then you had from O'Toole a refusal to speak to conservatives and address the issue he had with the base since the election, because he still kept chasing after those centrist votes in the strategy that just didn't work for him in the general. So I guess the question is, looking beyond what's happening right now, do you think that the O'Toole scenario is something that we can learn from, Harley? Do you think this proves that this plan that conservatives sometimes put forward of, okay, we've just got to run to the middle and make people like us, that'll work? Do you think this is the test case that proves that that won't work?
I think as a conservative leader, you can't ignore conservatives. And I think that's what's been happening here. And I mean, I'm happy to be talking with you guys, but my roots are in trucking. My parents ran a heavy duty repair shop. I worked there for 7 years. I knew the industry pretty well. And what I know is that in order to make these people mad, you have to do something really wrong. I wouldn't say they are overly politically active, but they get furious when they feel that their freedoms are being taken away. They're very independent. They're owner-operators. It's a very unforgiving job. They don't make a lot of money. And, when we got to the point where vaccine mandates started taking away their livelihoods, I mean, let's face it, we've already been locked down. The supply chains are strained. Our economy is in shambles. And then, oh yeah, by the way, you need to get vaccinated to keep working. It's not just about that. It's about freedom. It's about their ability to make choices, accept risks on their own. And there was nothing coming out of Parliament Hill reflecting those concerns. It was like you had a Liberal majority, wall to wall. And
do you think, Candice, that the convoy effect contributed to this, or do you think it was more of a coincidence, or perhaps the final nail in the coffin, really?
Well, it's interesting, and I really appreciate what Harley was just saying. I didn't realize that you had family and background in that, and I think it's such a tremendous contribution that truckers do, and so many of us don't realize it. We take for granted what we see on our shelves, and the fact that even during a COVID pandemic, I mean, I remember thinking it was pretty amazing, to go to my local Loblaws right in the middle of the pandemic when everyone was afraid to go outside. And there was the grocery store looking beautifully fully packed with fresh vegetables and fruit in the middle of March in winter in Canada. And it is an incredible, they're the sort of unsung, unrecognized heroes. It's interesting, Andrew, to your question, that when I was speaking to MPs, and I spoke to a lot of them, none of them wanted to go on the record, but they would all talk to me sort of what we call on background. So they tell me stuff and ask me not to attribute to them. But they would kind of brush that off and say, no, this was a long time coming. We've seen the writing on the wall. This was all because of his poor performance in January, with everything from his position on mandates to his sort of flip flops. The way that he stumbled around the truckers was part of it, but that wasn't what compelled the bill. Basically, it was like Q4 fundraising numbers, which were really low for the Conservatives, like the lowest in the history of the party, and also just this weird thing that he was going to do, where he was going to demand a public showing of loyalty among MPs, and they didn't want to participate in that, something along those lines. And so they kind of downplay it. But I think, to Harley's point, it's absolutely obvious, and you cannot ignore the fact that we are seeing something pretty remarkable, which is a grassroots working class uprising. When I was in university, I used to hear a lot from friends on the far left and the political left about the need for a working class revolution, to overthrow the bourgeoisie and to have the proletariat own the means of productions and all the Marxist stuff, right? But it's like this is what the left used to want and used to call for. They say that the working man needs to stand up and defend himself and fight against the powers that be. And here it's happening. I mean, you see the way that the media try to downplay it at first and then switch to really, really malicious slurring, and trying to completely denigrate an entire group based on a handful of crazy lunatics, which frankly you see at any single political event in the world and any protest, certainly. But this weird new standard that they've put on, I've been pretty vocal about my support for the trucking convoy on Twitter, and it's really interesting to read some of my quote tweets, which are from left-wing people like Gerald Butts or something like that, and what they say in response, like the way that they critique me, and it's like they don't really understand, or they don't recognize. I can't tell if they're malicious or if they're ignorant or if they truly just believe their own crazy rhetoric. But they've convinced themselves that the people who are on Parliament Hill, the truckers, the Freedom Convoy, that they're all just a bunch of far right radicals, which is so opposite from anyone who just spends a few minutes looking through videos, watching videos of the truckers. I mean, some of them will bring you to tears. I've been posting a lot of them, and you get emotional thinking about what these guys go through, the sacrifices that they make.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful thing that, to any non-sane person, this is an incredibly inspiring thing to watch. And we have seen the support pour in from all over the world. It is incredible to see these people who are kind of like the underdogs of our society, the marginalized people of our society, the people who don't typically have a voice. Here they are having this uprising, this political moment of consciousness. And what do you see? You see Justin Trudeau and his thousands and thousands of gaggles of reporters and liberal partisan hacks sitting there denigrating them and calling them Nazis. I cannot believe it. I was playing around on Twitter Spaces last night, going from room to room. I ended up speaking in a liberal room. I didn't realize it was liberal, but I ended up speaking to them, and I couldn't believe it. I was kind of shocked and saddened to hear the way that they were talking about the blue collar workers, and I think it's disgraceful. I think that people in this country need to realize that we're heading in dangerous territory here. If we say you no longer have a right to protest, they were saying that there's something illegal about what these guys were doing. Like, True North reported there were 0 arrests all weekend. I know there's been a few since, but the main Freedom Convoy, where we saw tens of thousands of people, no arrests, no injuries, a few incidents, but nothing compared to any kind of protests that we've seen over the last year, be it the Cancel Canada mobs, the Black Lives Rally riots or protests that devolved into riots in much of the US and many Canadian cities as well. They were looting a guitar store in Montreal. We didn't hear report after report after report about how these people were violent and therefore we couldn't even listen to their concerns. The way that they've painted these protesters, these Freedom Trucker convoys, has been absolutely malicious and despicable. I think we need to defend them more clearly. Conservatives need to defend them more clearly. I am completely certain, Andrew, to get back to your question, that this is tied to why this vote happened today, right now. This is a victory for the truckers. They wanted to replace Justin Trudeau. They didn't quite get that, but they did get some change. Some things are shaking up. Saskatchewan's announced that they're opening up completely. Quebec got rid of that god-awful draconian proposition to tax, to add an additional tax on the unvaccinated. The tides are turning towards freedom. And I think that this is just another reason why we should be thankful for these truckers, and Conservatives should make a much, much better effort at engaging with blue-collar working class voters, people who are disenfranchised, who feel alienated, who feel maligned by the ridiculous, awful media spin. I think it's a huge opportunity for Conservatives.
I would agree with that. And I think that even if the timing is just coincidental, and like those sources told you, this was a long time coming, I certainly think that the momentum to get rid of O'Toole came from the same place as the momentum that carried the convoy, which is that we're in the midst of some of the most monumental assaults on freedom that we've seen in Canada, certainly in generations. And there's been virtually no political opposition to it. And that's true of provincial and federal, but ultimately the federal government tends to be the symbol of government itself. And Erin O'Toole was just going along with it. And remember, when Justin Trudeau called the election, the argument, the line of defense that Erin O'Toole carried for weeks is, well, it's irresponsible because of COVID. Instead of, and that, because this is around the time when Canadians were starting to talk about, why are we not reopening? Can we break out of this fear? And there was no political opposition to this idea that we do need to live in perpetual fear and in a perpetual state of emergency. So even if the timing is somewhat coincidental, I think that Erin O'Toole needed to be a leader to this growing part of Canadians that were wanting a sensible, not a crazy, unhinged conspiracy theory, but a sensible approach to the pandemic. And we're going to get through a lot of the themes that are emerging here. And we're also going to get questions from our True North insiders. And if you want to become one of those, head on over to donate.tnc.news. Melody asks, what is the process to move forward? Interim leader, leadership competition, etc. And how long would all of that take? So the caucus is meeting tonight at 7 p.m. so that they can vote on an interim leader. So 7 p.m. We've already had at least one MP, Conservative Member of Parliament John Williamson, step up and say that he's going to seek the interim leadership. The Conservative Constitution, just so you know, says that if you're the interim leader, you cannot run for the permanent leadership of the, well, as permanent as leadership of the Conservatives is, but you can't run for the actual non-interim leadership of the Conservatives. So I just know that, like, tonight, a lot of people are going to be like, why is Pierre Poilievre not the interim leader? Why is Candice Bergen not, or whatever? A lot of the big heavyweights who are contenders for leader don't want to step up and be interim leader because that'll take them out of the running. And that was the whole Ronna Ambrose thing back in 2017. And as far as how long it'll take, I'll take you back to Ontario 2018. So in Ontario, they had an election scheduled for June 2018. They had a leader, Patrick Brown. And in January, the end of January, Patrick Brown had to resign in scandal. And they had a leadership race up and running within days, with a result determined in March. So I think it was like 6 weeks, 7 weeks total. So you can run a very quick, very efficient leadership race. That doesn't mean there always will be one, but it is possible. And in a minority government, the next leader has to be able to hit the ground running. So with all of that out of the way, let me ask you, Harley, what do you think should inform the leadership race? Because we didn't really have a huge amount of competition in 2020. You had Derek Sloan and Leslyn Lewis that were unknowns that were running for social conservatives. And Leslyn Lewis, of course, did establish herself quite well among the conservative base, but it was a two-horse race from the beginning, Peter MacKay versus Erin O'Toole. in contrast with 2017, where you had like the Hollywood squares, like just they're stacked on top of each other because there were so many candidates. So what do you think need to be the big issues and perhaps some of the candidates you'd like to see in the race now?
Well, first of all, with an interim leader, they just need to find a steady hand, someone who can hold the fort and let the leadership front runners kind of distinguish themselves in question period, as they've already been doing. In that case, Erin O'Toole would have made a good interim leader. But as we've seen, I mean, we've got Leslie Lewis, but Pierre Poliver especially, I mean, he stood out in this. And I mean, I look back 2017 earlier, it's really a shame that Maxime Bernier isn't still a conservative, because he's the only political figure that was speaking out against all of these lockdowns from the very start. But that said, better late than never. Poliver has stood up for the working class. He's stood up against lockdowns. He's defended the Constitution. It'll be interesting to see how many other conservatives, now that Erin O'Toole is gone, kind of step up to that line and start speaking the same way he does. But this is a new reality. We're in a new world now. What has happened in Canada under Justin Trudeau is unconscionable. I never thought it would happen. A lot of these truckers are there because they couldn't believe what has happened. And we need a conservative leader who understands how far we've been pushed back and is willing to push just as hard to get things back where we were before all this, and even better.
It's like we don't
What
have
are
a
the
lot of
main? I mean,
politicians
Pierre
in this
Poilievre, I think,
country
is at the top
who
of
are.
everyone's list of contenders here. But who else do you think is on that list of people that should run or people that you think will run?
Well, I was just trying to say that it's like conservative politicians in this country have failed us when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the lockdowns. I mean, we just saw this metadata release from Johns Hopkins University saying that lockdowns didn't help. Lockdowns did not stop the spread of COVID. That's it. And it's like, how many more scientific papers do we have to have disproving their narrative and their theory? And it's so weird to see liberals continue to double down on the idea that mandates work, on the idea that somehow getting vaccinated will stop the spread of COVID. That's false. We have updated scientific information telling us otherwise. And so the way that it's been politicized in this sort of weak response from conservatives is a major problem in this country for conservatives. I just think that they've lost touch. And I'm glad you brought up Maxime Bernier, because I think that if the Conservative Party really wanted to recognize the grassroots, and something I was going to say earlier, which I'll say now, if this vote was among the base of the party and the membership, I don't think it would have even been that close. You had 73 MPs vote against O'Toole and 35 voting for him. I don't think that split would have been anywhere near that if this was the members voting. I think it would have been like 95 to 5%, because the people who want him are the much more establishment types of the party, the people who fear populist uprising, and they sort of think that O'Toole's not great, but he's better than some unknown alternative, which everyone's afraid of Canada having their own Trump. Back to the point about Bernier. I think that the Conservatives need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and recognize how out of touch they are with the sentiments of Canadians, especially the Canadians that they're supposed to represent, the people who have suspicion and are mistrusting of big, grand government initiatives. And I think that the provincial leaders have faltered. I see a lot of comments with people talking about Ford and Kenny and how they have to go too. I think that they have let down Conservatives, and certainly Erin O'Toole is, which is why he's facing this fate today. If the Conservatives were to do that and really take a look in the mirror, reflect on how they've managed and their communication, how they've handled these lockdowns and the COVID crisis over the last 2 years, and they really wanted to show some good faith in connecting with the base, they might consider letting Maxime Bernier back into the party and inviting him to run for leader. Because I'll just say, when I was a young conservative, or when I was a young person who was political, one of the things that really excited me about the Conservative Party of Canada was Maxime Bernier and his libertarian ideas. I think it really appeals to young people. Bernier has a very exciting style. I think that he brings in a lot of people to the party, a lot of excitement. You can see it on social media. The PPC supporters are always the loudest. They're the most enthusiastic. I think that we saw Bernier raise a lot of money for the Conservative Party, and that money is now not going to them anymore. And I think that if you can channel Bernier's talents and his powers for good in the conservative sense and bring him back on board, it would show that they were willing to listen to the base, that they were willing to engage on libertarian and sort of a different set of ideals that many conservatives hold. Many conservatives believe in what Maxime Bernier is saying, and they'll just say that the reason that they don't like the PC is because they think it's like a one-man show, or that it's risking the future of conservatism in the country. But they don't disagree with him on principle and on policy. And so I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to see the Conservatives taking that step, because if the Conservative Party loses the Libertarians, if they say that libertarianism is not part of our movement and the Libertarians can just go away and go to the PPC, that's a problem for the party in the long run as well.
I think the vision that you're putting out is an optimistic one, because I mean, Maxime Bernier has gone scorched earth on the Conservatives, and he's been asked, in fact, I might have even asked him at one point if there were ever a leadership opening, if he would seek the leadership. I mean, even in fairness, when Andrew Scheer left, that he could have run in that one, and he's since doubled, tripled, quadrupled down that he thinks the party itself is corrupt. I mean, if we want to go back in time here, I think had he just kept his mouth shut and waited for Andrew Scheer to lose the election, he would be the leader right now. And he very well could be the prime minister right now, if we're talking about just alternate histories here. But you raised an important point about all of the people that the party has pushed away. Derek Sloan was one who Erin O'Toole had expelled from caucus. Jim Carahalios was disqualified from seeking the leadership. Going back, we have Maxime Bernier. And at the provincial levels as well, you have some Conservatives that were elected as Conservatives and then disenfranchised or expelled. So ideally, you'd want a leader who can unify these people, at least the ones who want to come back to the table. And I have to say, Pierre Poilievre, I think, is one who could do that, simply because I know whenever we have him on our show, on our station, on our shows, and whenever we write stories about him, the amount of response we get from people that are, attacking O'Toole and Kenny and Ford other times, but love Poilievre, he has a broader appeal in the Conservative movement. Harley, I mean, is it his to lose at this point, or do you think that might be rushing through the next few steps a bit?
Well, he's certainly been the most vocal Conservative in the last couple of weeks, especially with the convoy and with like these Justin Trudeau saying the outrageous things he did. I mean, he's been pushing back hard. I think he's got a lot of momentum, at least within that kind of very narrow time frame. Things can change quickly as soon as they open up, to the entire party. Different candidates can emerge, different perspectives. I think he's a good choice. But at the same time, I mean, just I agree that Bernier would be more likely to invite the Conservatives to join the People's Party than the other way around. But he has doubled and quadrupled down for good reason. He's been trying to hold them to account for things that he would have stood for if he'd been still with them. And so in the same way Candice said, Erin O'Toole lost a huge opportunity with this convoy to almost like apologize and say, you've shown me the way. I realize now what's important and I'll push back. I think there would have been willingness to hear that. And so for the Conservatives to now, pivot and to try to pick up some of that momentum and represent more of the libertarian, even working class people, I think they need to change. They need to admit that they've been wrong. They need to say we've done wrong by Canadians, and ousting O'Toole is the first step. And Pierre Poilievre, let's face it, he's been the most vocal. So like I said, it'll be interesting to see how many other Conservatives start speaking like Poilievre as we approach the leadership race. I mean, Erin O'Toole was pretty red meat when he was running for the leadership too. But then all of a sudden, he became this red Tory, and he became the moderate, and he started portraying his opponents as the extreme. It's weird. I think what Canadians want right now is someone who's gonna walk the walk. And right now, Poilievre has all that momentum.
And it's not just the momentum. Andrew, let me just jump in here, because Poilievre has something that Erin O'Toole never had, right? And Erin O'Toole ran in 2017, and I remember seeing his speech on the night that they were announcing the leadership victory. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, that guy has a lot. There's something to him. I wish I had explored it, because I just didn't really know who he was. And he didn't stand out to me in the field in that leadership race. He was just another, there were 19 candidates or whatever. He didn't do anything to make his mark. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, he's got a military background, and he served the country, and he seemed passionately Canadian. And I remember thinking there's something to Erin O'Toole. And then when he came back in 2020, it was like a different version of him or whatever. And we now see that that was just the mask that he put on to try to get elected. All this just to say that Pierre Poilievre, we know exactly what he believes in. He speaks with conviction. He is confident. He believes in what he's saying, or at least from an outsider's perspective, people watching, people who pay attention to politics, we feel the conviction in what he's saying. I've never seen a spark of that in Erin O'Toole, and I think that was a big part of his demise and why he's no longer the leader. So I think that for Pierre, it's not even necessarily about what his issues are and where he stands and how blue he is or how conservative he is on different issues, because we don't really know exactly where he stands on a lot of social issues. However, the thing that Pierre has going for him is that he's not afraid. Right? The moment that the media started maligning and maliciously slurring all of these truckers, Pierre didn't care. He was there. He stood his ground. He articulated his perspective. He stood up for those people, and in a way that most MPs were afraid to do. And once Pierre did that, others followed. That's leadership. That's leadership. That's conviction. I think that's exactly why people are looking to Pierre right now, hoping that he is going to throw his hat in and say, yes, I'll do this, because we know back in 2020, Andrew, you probably remember this, he was initially running and then he decided to pull out, and he said that he was going to focus on his family. He's got 2 really little kids, and he didn't want to, running for leader and becoming a leader of the party is an all-consuming, life-consuming job. You have to have the full support of your family. You have to have the full commitment yourself to do it. And if Pierre doesn't have that, then that's going to be a problem for him and the party. But I think that the reason that people are so excited about Pierre, and you can see it in the comments, we can see the comments coming up on the screen here for both Facebook and YouTube, which is really fun, because usually when we do these live streams, you can't, but because of the program and software we're using, we can. So we can see, I would estimate that like every 10th comment is something about Pierre. People love him. The conservative, it's clear that he resonates more than any other conservative out there.
I just saw one that says, if Pierre wins, I will cry. I don't know if that's tears of joy or tears of sadness, but if that was you, let me know. Let me know which way. I'm curious why you'd feel emotionally either direction on that one. Let's get to another insider question here that's relevant to this topic. Nancy asks, well, the CPC does have champions like Pierre Poilievre and Candice Bergen and others who could lead them to victory. How can the party be truly united if its national council has an opposing agenda and remains intact? So I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but Nancy touches on, I think, an important point, which is just the institutional identity of the Conservative Party. National Council is going to be the group that's responsible for setting up the terms of the leadership race, everything to do with the entry fee, to the rules, to establishing who sits on the leadership committee. And that's the committee that will get to decide if a candidate is unwelcome in the race. That was the committee that disqualified Jim Karahalios last time around, for example. So ideally, you'd have someone who's respected enough that when they come in, when they enter this space, the party itself respects that they are the leader. And this is where Canada and the US are kind of different in a way, because in the US, when you win a primary, for all intents and purposes, you're the leader of the party and everything is at your disposal. In Canada, it works like that in some ways, but you still get resistance. You get a lot of pushback from people on bodies like the Conservative Fund and the National Council and all of that. And remember, there are some people on council that were responsible just a couple of weeks ago for kicking off Bert Chen, who was trying to get rid of Erin O'Toole right after the election. So all of those national councillors that voted to get rid of someone for opposing O'Toole, I'd say they probably owe Bert Chen an apology, but those people are still the majority on national council in a post-O'Toole party. So again, for the most part, victory is a strong antidote to poison, because once someone wins, people just kind of say, okay, let's just go along with it. But you've got to get there first. Are you confident, Candice, the party can do that?
Well, I just want to stop there because I'm not even clear about this myself, and I've been around politics for, I think, 15 years. Can you explain exactly what the National Council is and what it does? I know that they elect them and that there are representatives from each of the provinces, but what is the role and how does it affect the party and its day-to-day operations?
I mean, ideally, they're supposed to just be that oversight for the party, like a corporate board. They're not the CEO of the party. They're not the leader of the party, but they're the ones who can make determinations that affect the day-to-day operations of the party. But at the end of the day, they have some ability to to maneuver things. For example, National Council could have worked to move up the leadership convention or the review that would have had Erin O'Toole subjected to the grassroots voting on his leadership. And interestingly enough, one of the things that we'll see here is that the National Council didn't do that. The National Council was quite resistant. The president of the party, Robert Bathison, was saying, no, this is all out of order. We're not entertaining this. So the National Council does have some power when it comes to these administrative decisions like conventions, which can be very relevant. And they're also going to be the ones now setting up, as I mentioned, the rules of the leadership race.
Well, I think that Conservatives have a problem when it comes to the way that they run their leadership campaigns. They don't feel very democratic. They don't feel very connected to the grassroots. I know that in 2017, you had way too many candidates. Like, they should have narrowed down the field. And the way that Maxime Bernier lost after being ahead, I think, what was it, Andrew, like 13 or 14 ballots, it felt very undemocratic. That's not how we run our elections in the federal election. It's first past the post, right? And so to have this weird runoff ballot thingy where all of a sudden someone who had 30% of the vote jumps up to having 50% of the vote, I think that a lot of Canadians, Conservatives, I should say, members didn't like that, especially obviously people who supported Bernier. And then when it came to 2020, there was a lot of shenanigans. I know that there was like lawsuits and bad blood between O'Toole's camp and McKay's camp, and the staffers still hate each other. It just doesn't really seem like a very well-run machine, Andrew. And I'm with my friend JJ McCullough, a YouTuber. He makes a point that the American primary system is so much more democratic. Anyone can go, anyone can vote. It's so much more engaging. When you get to the final point in Canada where you're choosing between Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, it's like, how did we come up with these two choices, right? How few people there's such a small number of Canadians got to actually choose who those two names were that go on the ballot. Even the Liberals are more open because at least their memberships are free. But still, like, the fact that we have such a weird, antiquated system of choosing the leader, it doesn't feel like a very open system. And I mean, Conservatives have a problem with candidate recruitment as well. I don't think that they recruit necessarily enough people from across the spectrum of society. Like, why aren't there more high-profile, successful business people running for public office for the Conservatives? Why don't we have? We had Kevin O'Leary a couple of years ago. I don't know why he ended up not following through, because I think he would have won and he might have become prime minister. But I think that it would be great to pull in an outsider, pull in someone who has a different perspective as well, at least for the leadership race, so that we can see them duke it out and battle for the future of the party.
Yeah, let me turn to you on this one, Harley, because again, I want to get out of the weeds on this and look at the bigger picture here, because a lot of people that don't follow the day-to-day operations of the Conservative Party, and I'd say are probably all the better for it, are just looking at this and saying, what is this going to mean for me in the next election? What is this going to mean for the next little bit of my life? And I go back to the fact that we are in a period of monumental challenges and encroachments on civil liberties. There's a huge opportunity for a Conservative leader to be a leader here. And I look at how the convoy became somewhat of a litmus test for which kind of Conservative you were. And a lot of MPs that were generally keeping their mouths shut and falling in line seemed to just break with that. We had Candice Bergen, the deputy leader, Pierre Poilievre, we've had Tim Uppal, we've had all of these MPs that have been quite unrestrained in supporting the convoy in the last week. And then Erin O'Toole, who infamously at that press conference just couldn't say one way or another. So if we are looking at Canadians as a whole here, what is the thing that will allow a Conservative to appeal to the base and also expand the base?
I think it's easy, as we all have been, to have been swept up in the past week in the convoy, in the pressure, in Trudeau's heinous remarks about them, and to start hoping that this will be what turns everything around. I think that people want things to change fast. They don't want to see it get down to the weeds, as you said, and process is weedy. They don't want to see front-running, promising candidates disqualified for technicalities or for, tiny unsavory things they might have said 10 years ago. I mean, out in BC, we watched Aaron Gunn, kicked out of the BC Liberal leadership run because of opinions he supposedly had.
There's a potential candidate, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Erin's a great guy, and so I think we want to see people like Pierre Poilievre, pronounce it either way. But we want to see people who have integrity, who don't seem to be catering to the established political kind of ideologies that predated the pandemic and which have gotten us into this trouble. We want to see quick movement, and I think in the same way that we saw the NDP under Jack Layton basically sweep Quebec. This is a great opportunity for any party and any leader who wants to turn around and say, enough is enough. We're getting back to the way things ought to be. The science is there. The precedent is there in other countries. We can see down the road. Trudeau has proven himself completely unqualified to be a leader of a democratic country. And we just need to get back to being Canadians and doing what we do best, and that's working hard and minding our own business.
I love that. I just want to point out that the egregious beyond the pale thing that Aaron Gunn said that disqualified him from running for the only center-right party in British Columbia, which is called the Liberal Party, unfortunately, but it's a coalition of Liberals and Conservatives. The egregious thing that he said was that Canada was not a genocidal country. That's what he said. That was, they had 4 examples of tweets, and it was like something factual about Johnny MacDonald that was not untrue, and that he said that Canada wasn't genocidal. And according to the elites and the people who run the gatekeepers at the BC Liberal Party, that was egregious and didn't align with their values. And we see a lot of that kind of stuff in politics, the whole cancel culture. I think that the left and the media are trying to do that to the entire trucker convoy. They're saying if you defend the trucker convoy, it is because you are a Nazi, full stop. And I heard that on the Twitter Spaces last night. I know it sounds like a exaggeration or a caricature of what a liberal might say, but I heard them saying it last night on a Twitter Space channel, and I was pretty godsmacked, and I jumped in with my opinion, and they didn't like that, but we had a good time anyway. But I just want to say that I think that Harley's so right that we need to get back to our roots as Canadians, and the Conservatives need to do the same thing. I saw some people commenting on the channel, and it made me want to bring this up and throw this into discussion. But the idea that the leader of the Conservative Party needs to speak French is foolish. It makes no difference. If you go back through and look at the electoral history of the party when you had a French-speaking leader versus a non-French-speaking leader, there's hardly any difference, okay? Quebec is not going to vote for the Conservative Party. The only chance that the Conservative Party has of making any inroads in Quebec is if they have a leader from Quebec. Quebecers vote for their own. That is why they voted for Jack Layton. That is why they voted for Brian Mulroney. Otherwise, they will always vote for Liberal. And with Justin Trudeau, even if they don't like him, and even if they don't agree with his values, and they don't like his position and his view of Canada, they will vote for him because he is their native son. That is how Quebec works. So this whole effort and movement in the Conservative Party to obsess over having a conservative speaking leader and a conservative that spends time and focuses in Quebec is a total waste of time. It is a losing strategy. I think that the Conservatives should focus on their strong suit, which is appealing to Western Canadian values and trying to make the inroads that it was making before in the 905 and the Vancouver area with New Canadians. I think New Canadians are a much more fertile audience and potential voters for the Conservative Party than Quebec. And every single election, we see them devote way too many resources and focus way too much on Quebec. We see this every single time there's a leadership race, obsessing over the ability of someone to speak French. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you speak French. They will not vote for you unless you're from Quebec. And that's just the case. That's the reality in this country. I think that Conservatives would be wise to try to find the best leader who represents conservative values and can articulate things that would appeal to Canadians, as opposed to obsessing over this idea that they have to speak polished French as if that matters, one iota. It doesn't.
We'll get to a couple more of your insider questions here. We have one from, I guess we kind of addressed this. Andrea says, is Pierre Poilievre considering a role as leader of the CPC? I think he's certainly considering it. I think he's been considering it. The question is, will he pull the trigger? When, as Candice mentioned earlier, he didn't last time, although it sounded like came very close to doing so. Teresa writes, can't Parliament vote as a whole a non-confidence vote to oust Trudeau? I'll just answer that one quickly here. Yeah, they could do that at any point, but the whole dimension of this is that the NDP and the Bloc Québécois back the Liberals. In the Bloc Québécois, they know they're not going to get a better performance than they have right now, so they want to milk the performance. And in the case of the NDP, they can't afford to go back to the polls. So a non-confidence vote with a Conservative minority opposition is not going to be enough to topple the Liberals. But this one, I think, is a question we should all be delving into here. Garth writes, the current Conservative, so he wrote this before O'Toole was ousted, will likely be ousted today. Will it make any difference? I think this is a very big question, because when Andrew Scheer got elected, he was Captain SoCon up against Maxime Bernier, the Libertarian. Everyone thought, okay, we've got a solid blue Tory from Western Canada here. And then, not to relitigate the 2019 election, but during that election, we hear him stumbling and stammering, not really talking about any issues of substance, not giving a clear answer on the social questions. And it was only after the election that Andrew Scheer started shooting from the hip again. Erin O'Toole runs as the true blue red meat conservative, defund the CBC, pro free speech, pro guns. And then in the election, I think pretty much the platform was down to just 2.5 pages by the end of the campaign, because he kept just ripping pages out of it. So people that play the conservative, and in many cases are the conservative, get consumed by the apparatus, playing to the media, and come election time, they stop being what conservatives voted for. So how do you prevent that from, and I don't know which one of you wants to take this, how do you prevent that from happening to whoever comes next that we may think is a solid candidate now, but they just become consumed by the consultant class once they get into the leadership?
You want to take this one, Harley? I feel like I've been talking a lot. I could jump in, though, because I've got a lot to say about this, too.
Well, Ottawa is Ottawa, and we all come from different parts of the country, and it's hard to understand the way Parliament Hill works unless you've been there for a while, you've worked in it, you've been a staffer, you've been a journalist. And it's easy for someone to come from the outside and after a while start sounding like somebody from Ottawa, becoming Ottawa-washed, as they call it. But I think I
like that. I've never heard that one before.
Oh yeah.
Really? Oh man, I hear that a lot.
I think it's never been easier to avoid these questions by being opposition. We need to get back to what Canada was before the pandemic, and simply opposing the Trudeau government will provide a party with enough ammunition to go into the next election and really put up a fighting chance of getting elected to a minority or a majority government. I think the issues of regionalism, speaking French, corporatism, a social conservative, fiscal conservative, these things can be put on the back burner right now. We're in a crisis right now. We want to get our lives back. We want to get our constitution back. We want to be able to accept risks on our own. So a lot of us work jobs that were inherently dangerous, and that was part of life. And now we were being told to do things because life was too dangerous for the policymakers. I think that we need to just put all of these divisive identity issues behind us and simply agree opposition to the Trudeau government is what's going to cause enough unification to possibly get in and try to do our best to return to rule of law and get out of these emergency measures that have allowed all of what we grew up believing sacred to have been suspended.
Well, I'll go
Candice,
more to
you said you had a lot to say. Take it away.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about everything, Andrew. But the technical side of it, right? It's like you're running for the leader of the Conservative Party. You're speaking to conservative voters in the conservative base, which is very different from the general public. So the conventional wisdom goes that you have to sort of swing to the right to get elected at the party level, and then once you become leader, you can moderate and start talking more to people in Quebec and people in Ontario and specifically in the GTA, and basically water down your message or change your message. And that's sort of the wisdom of the party. We saw that play out really, really strongly with Erin O'Toole. We saw it with Andrew Scheer too. I mean, come on, he was backing a bunch of stuff that his position on the Paris Accord changed, right? Like this happens to every leader. However, it was so bad with O'Toole that I think that it just became so noticeable because of the way that he branded himself True Blue and just all of the flip-flops. And I think that part of the way that we counteract that, and I think I really don't want to toot our own horn here, but I think that the rise of independent media and having outlets like True North that are more oriented towards a conservative worldview and therefore focus our efforts more on conservatives, we we documented it, right? We showed the world how Erin O'Toole morphed and what he did and how he was super conservative when it came to the leadership and how that wasn't what he was doing at all. And kind of exposed this game that a lot of the consultant class, to use Harley's phrase, what they advise, what they say that this needs to be done in order to win. And there's so many people in Toronto that frankly agree with you and I, Andrew and Harley, on most of the issues. However, they say, well, that's not palatable to the public, therefore we have to moderate. And so what they do is they sort of fundamentally lie to themselves, right? They're out there selling ideas and policies that they don't really believe in, but they believe that they have to say that in order to get elected. And there's like an authenticity gap. And I think we've seen that with so many leaders. And so one of the things that we have to do in order to hold these people accountable is to continue to shine the spotlight on them and to say, we remember exactly what you said when you were running for leader. You said you were going to defund the CBC. That was part of your pledge. That is why these people are supporting you. And now that you're leader, you're saying that you want to work with them and review their mandate and give them different marching orders, essentially. And it's like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Canadians are watching you, and we want accountable government. We want politicians who are authentic, who do what they say they're going to do, who remain the same, who say the same thing, regardless of what part of the country they're speaking in, what language they're speaking in, who they're speaking to. We want an authentic person whom we can trust. And I think that was really a major, major flaw with Erin O'Toole. That's from the MPs that I was speaking to and the insiders. It's like, yeah, we didn't agree with him policy. We didn't like the flip-flops, this and that. But fundamentally, the issue with Erin O'Toole was about trust. We couldn't trust him because we didn't know who he was. We didn't know what he believed in. And he would say something different every time he spoke. And so I think as far as just how to stop that, well, we just have to continue to hold these politicians accountable, Andrew. And I think that's why, we do the job we do and why we love it so much.
Yeah, and just on the note of the independent media effect here. So one thing that I think I mentioned it on my show, but I don't think I made a big deal of it because I didn't want it to sound petty, but I do think it's relevant here. Erin O'Toole has not spoken to True North since the election. He has not given an interview to True North since December of 2020. He did take questions on the campaign trail at press conferences, but True North had to pay to be on the plane. And part of the trade-off is that you pay for a seat on the plane and you get access at press conferences, but has not done an interview even after the election. Even after the election, when we have tried to say, hey, I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak to conservatives, to speak to these issues. And every time, if I even get a response, it's no, but typically I wouldn't get a response. And at press conferences as well, I've called in, haven't been called on. Is it just because there's a high volume of journalists wanting to ask him questions, or was I being selectively taken out of the queue? I don't know, and I don't particularly care. But O'Toole has not wanted to speak to conservatives and conservative issues. And the result of that is that he gets pummeled in the press anytime he does say something, because the press is approaching these things from inherently liberal premises. That's the whole point. The questions that mainstream media journalists ask: why are you not spending more on X? Why are you not condemning this candidate of yours? That's the approach. And I look back to 2020 when we did some coverage that I'm so proud of on the conservative leadership race. And one example that I've told is that at the Conservative Party of Canada debates, the official debates, they had scrums after. And at one of the debates, the 50%, literally 50% of the questions asked by reporters were about abortion. At the other one of the debates, 50% of the questions were about systemic racism. Not the issues that conservative Canadians were wanting to get their conservative leaders to weigh in on. Whereas we sat down at length with a couple of the candidates and we were talking about supply management. We were talking about free speech. We were talking about the energy sector. We were talking about things that are relevant to Canadians, but also to the conservatives who get to decide how they're going to vote in a leadership race. So to bring this back to where we are now, I would love for a leader to realize that you're never going to win playing a game when the table is set by people who are against you. And one thing that Pierre Poilievre has done fairly well is be somewhat, I don't want to say Ron DeSantis-like, but the Canadian lighter version of Ron DeSantis, and actually rejecting the premises of questions that are traps or questions that are flawed. And he does this very skillfully. If the leaders, whoever they are, the leadership candidates, can do that and start defining conservatism and their values and their party in their own terms, I think we'll have a much better footing to see these people head into the next election. What do you think, Harley?
I completely agree. We were talking about the convoy arriving in Ottawa on Saturday, and a lot of these guys, these blue collar guys. I mean, I don't know how often they'd been in Ottawa before this, but certainly the people way out west in Canada and Delta, they haven't been there a lot, especially in their trucks and especially wearing their overalls and their hardcover, their steel-toed boots. Uh, Ottawa is a strange place, and you can instantly step out and say, "Wow, like." I don't fit in here. Well, on the same token, there are plenty in Ottawa that don't think they fit in there either, but it's our capital, right? And so we need to recognize that Canadians have different beliefs, different positions. We're not all trying to fit in with each other, and especially not up to us to fit in into the politicians' idea of what we ought to be. So uh, it's just important to stop trying to prescribe ideology to your supporters, and to focus right now. Like I said, there's never been a greater opportunity to cut around this stuff, to get away from the traps that the table has been set, like you said. Hot button issues like abortion and things like critical race theory, and there are all these traps that are laid. And this is why the convoy organizers put out a warning to the participants, saying, "Be very careful. You are in hostile territory. Do not enter federal buildings. Do not. These are not your friends." A lot of these mainstream legacy media, they're going to try to smear you, even if you do nothing wrong, which is what we saw, right? And so right now, like I said, there is momentum for change. As long as we can agree that Canada's not where we want it to be right now, I think that gives any party that's trying to provide a viable opposition a lot of ammunition, a lot of ammo. We don't need to agree on every little thing, and I think this will allow us to kind of, again, cut through the identity politics and focus on what it is to Canadian. That's a belief in freedom, a belief in charter rights, a belief in rule of law, and simply like an opposition to the sort of hatred we heard from Trudeau, and a constant, reliance on emergency measures to pass legislation that 5-10 years ago would have been considered unconscionable in a place like Canada. Like in Nova Scotia, you can't even protest on the highway between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick to support the trucker convoy anymore.
Or donate to the GoFundMe.
Exactly, yeah, and they were going to have a rally there on Saturday, like a lot of places and capitals in Canada did when the convoy arrived in Ottawa, and that was outlawed by the Nova Scotia government before it could happen. This stuff's crazy. This is absolutely nuts. And I mean, in the same way, animals can sense a change in the weather, and I can say this because I come from working class roots. Working class guys can sense when something's wrong. They can feel there's something not right about what's going on, about like freedoms being taken away, about you're being told, for example, that you can't have a job unless you undergo a medical treatment. These are unconscionable things in the minds of many Canadians, and for them to push back, and for Canadians to want so vehemently for a viable political alternative should give the next leader and any party that wants to capitalize this the talking points and the ammunition at the very least, but in very hope ability to reach out and understand what Canadians are looking for going into the next election.
Well, I just want to pick up on something you said there, Harley, because I think that the truck convoy and the Freedom Rally, the focus of the media has sort of gotten us off task, right? The media wanted to talk about violence, they wanted to talk about extremism, they wanted to do everything they could to discredit these truckers, and I think that a lot of conservatives went into defense mode to say you were being unfair, and to rightly defend the truckers in the places that they deserve to be defended. Of course, there's a few people that are beyond the pale, and those people should be removed. but for the most part, defending the truckers, I think that misses the broader point, and the broader picture is that Canada in 2022 doesn't look like Canada anymore, and Canadians who are supposed to be loving, neighborly, nice, kind, reconciliatory, easygoing people feels like we're at war with one another. The rhetoric is really dangerous. The way that the politicians sort of pour gasoline on the fire, the way that they say that if you disagree with them, it's because you hate science. I think that who was one of the Liberal cabinet ministers posted that the other day, that if you disagree with science, it's because you're wrong. And like, it's not science, it's their politicized interpretation of cherry-picked scientific figures, right? So I think that there are some really scary things happening in this country. When you start hearing a cabinet minister for the prime minister talking about forced vaccination, we're not talking about mandates. We're talking about some kind of forced vaccine. When we talk about the idea of charging people an extra tax, levying an extra tax if they don't take a medical procedure that's supposed to be voluntary, there's so many examples. We could sit here for an hour and go through them all. That's people feel that their fundamental freedoms are being violated. That's the red line for so many Canadians that has been crossed, and they are just no longer willing to go along anymore, especially given all the changes. And we've talked about this before, but just the idea that vaccine mandates don't work. Vaccines don't stop the spread of COVID. Everybody gets COVID. It doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not. Justin Trudeau has COVID right now, and he's been triple vaxxed. So people who continue to say this kind of stuff, they're not paying attention to the latest updates from science. They're supposed to be the ones that are championing and wrapping themselves in science, and they're not even paying attention unless it reinforces their political partisan perspective. And I think that the trucker rally is a huge wake-up call for so many of us who are saying, we want Canada back. Enough with the tribalism, enough with this viciousness that we're seeing on the internet, enough with just routinely trying to discredit people by calling them Nazis and far right. Let's just stop with that. Let's focus back on our country. Let's get rid of these ridiculous mandates that don't help. Let's stop forcing Canadians to make decisions that go against their conscience and their beliefs. Let's stop firing people and eliminating their livelihood because they don't agree with us. Like, none of those things are Canadian. And I think that these are the conversations that we need to be having and pushing forward and getting the Conservatives to think about and talk about and address this stuff, because the next Conservative leader had better have a different response when it comes to COVID and vaccines and mandates than this current crop, because the current crop is so out of touch with the people in their own party and so many Canadians that just don't want to go along with this medical tyranny anymore.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. And as we wind down here, I want to just say something that I think is important to note here, is that at True North, we have to now pivot into Conservative leadership race coverage mode, which will certainly be no shortage of content, but it also means there are going to be costs, because this is going to be a little bit different than 2020. There are going to be real events, we hope. We may even talk about putting a debate on, like well, that's the whole traumatic thing that we have to get into about Peter MacKay and all that. But we want to do a debate. That's going to be something on our list. So legitimately, if you can chip into our coverage of the trucker convoy, which is still ongoing, and what is shaping up to be a Conservative leadership race in the coming weeks, please do. You can head on over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can even donate right from YouTube. I've seen a couple of super chats come in, so thanks very much for those who are sharing their support on that platform. But just before we say farewell, I want to do a bit of a final thought, if I can here. What would your closing words be, Harley? And then we'll get to you, Candice. And if I have anything to say, which is no guarantee, I might add some as well. But we'll start with you, Harley.
First of all, I know everybody watching knows Andrew and Candice very well. I've only been with True North for a couple of months. I'm extremely grateful and happy to be here, to be pushing back against this insanity. Again, I'm a British Columbian. I come from a working class background, worked in a heavy duty repair shop. I lived in Ottawa for a long time and went to university, as my wife worked on Parliament Hill in journalism there. I lived across the country, and now that I'm back in BC, it's just, I'm very grateful to be given a voice and to be helping you guys to cause the kind of things to happen that we just saw. I think, like, I grew up wanting to be left alone. Working class people want to be left alone. Good, hardworking Canadians just want to make their own choices, work hard, get ahead under their own steam and on their own merits. And I think right now we can all get behind what's happening here and agree. If we can just get back to that self-determinism, we can just get the government out of our hair, out of our faces, and just get back to what it was that we did as Canadians best. Again, like I said, working hard, helping each other, but otherwise leaving each other alone, I think we're a far better country for it. Thank you very much to all of our supporters, and just keep an eye on True North. We'll be doing everything we can with the team we have, working hard to cover the leadership, and also constantly pushing back against all these measures that are continuing.
Sounded like you were about to start a campaign speech there. You're not running for the leadership, are you?
No. My children aren't quite as young as Pierre Poilievre, but I think I'd have to arm wrestle my wife for that opportunity just to get to it in the first place. But no, I'm happy
she's
with
a contender. I would vote for her. No offense to you. Candice, final thoughts?
Well, I just want to say Harley is very humble because he left out a whole bunch of his bio, including the fact that he has a PhD in English from the University of Toronto and that he has a law enforcement background. It was like when we saw his resume come on our desk, it's like I couldn't believe this was a real person. He has so much experience. He's done so many things in his life, and I have a friend and I've worked with his wife in the past, and so it's just tremendous, Harley, to have you on board. He's an editor, and so if you've noticed, the writing on True North's website has gotten a lot better. It's because Harley's editing our stuff and making it better, and really just representing a different voice that we're so pleased and so thrilled to have in our organization. And tremendous, I know that we are focused on the leadership, we're focused on the trucker rally and all of the great exciting things that are happening. The world does feel freer. It's like we've turned a corner, we see light at the end of the tunnel, and it's such a pleasure for us at True North. Look, I don't want to laugh at the misfortunes of the Conservative Party, but their terrible Q4 fundraising, the fact that they didn't raise very much money in the last quarter of last year, True North had the opposite. I think that a lot of the people who might have otherwise donated some money to the Conservatives were donating to True North, giving us, $10, $20, $50 donations, and it really adds up. And we've seen tremendous growth in our organization. We're continuing to grow. It feels like we have momentum, that more people are paying attention. I get so many kind and supportive notes from so many people, even people who don't necessarily agree with us. They appreciate the independent voice and the different perspective that we have. And so it feels like we're heading in a good direction with True North and with the country. And I think we've got such a good team. It's so wonderful to have Andrew on board. Andrew, you've been with us since pretty much the beginning of True North, and to have new voices like Harley. We're going to continue to bring on new voices, different perspectives, and continue to just provide a different perspective than what you're seeing at the media. Andrew, you asked that question about the misleading and the obsessive questions that the parliamentary press gallery put to the politicians. Well, True North wants to break that up. We want to make sure that the things that you, the audience, care about are making it to the politicians, that you're not going to be alienated and ignored, that you're going to be participating in the political process. We all want to participate in our democracy, and we have to. We have to, because if we say, screw this, I hate these people, leave me alone, I'm going to just do my own thing, they're going to continue to take a country down a very, very dangerous path. We need to have political movement. We need to have representation. We need our voices to be heard, and that comes from every angle, right? That comes from the political angle, that comes from the journalism angle, that comes from the sort of people just getting involved. And I think it's going to take a big effort for us to get our country back, but we're heading in that direction. We need to continue to focus and use the momentum that we have right now to just continue to drive home to what Harley was saying, to get our country back, to get Canada back.
See, I should never plan to put myself after Candice, because there's no following a mic drop moment like that. So I don't have anything to add. I'm having a show come out tomorrow. Maybe I'll come up with some stuff. I can't top that, though. Well said, Candice. Well said, Harley. A big thanks to the team we have working behind the scenes here on this show, to Phil and to Jacob. And also, I mean, True North is so big, I can't list everyone in the closing credits and acknowledgments now, which is a great problem to have. But we've got people all over the country. We are hard at work covering the race, covering the convoy, and lots else. So thanks to you, Candice and Harley, for coming on, and to all of you for tuning in. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you soon, and God bless you.